So here we are. It's Tuesday night. Today, the 4th of Av, was the yard site of our dear Reb Menachem Azaria of Fano, who needs no introductions. Already a long time ago, he ceased being a guest and is already one of our staples at the Shir. The day before was the yard site of another great Kabbalist, Reb Shamshon of Ostropolia, who was unfortunately killed during the Khmelnytsky massacres in Ukraine in the city of Polno. And we had a shir once about him a couple of years back, about the Khmelnytsky massacres. So right after him is today the yard site of Reb Menachem Azaria of Fano. And tonight, the 5th of Av, of course, is the yard site of the great Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, the Arizal. So this is a wondrous week as far as Kabbalistic personalities, towering personalities. So the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, there's so much to talk about. And the truth is a bit of a chutzpah for me to sit here and talk about the Arizal. But nonetheless, I hope you won't mind. There's an idea of al tigu b'mshichai. Many say, don't touch my anointed ones. The Eibishter gets offended when we speak casually about his great tzaddikim. Don't touch my anointed ones. So know your place. Okay, so with the Eibishter's help, we will not speak about the Arizal as a friend or as a comrade, but with the true respect that he deserves. And the truth is, all the great tzaddikim deserve that. But we're going to see that Arizal, as is well known, was just something out of this world. He's born in the year 1534. He's born in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, I believe, to his father, Reb Shloime Luria, and his mother, Sarah. And Luria is an Ashkenazic last name. It's an Ashkenazic last name, so his father was an Ashkenazi. His mother's last name was Francis or Parnassus, spelled different ways. She was a Sephardic. Unfortunately, when the Arizal was young, he lost his father. And after some time, his mother felt the best move would be to move to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. She had a brother, Rav Mordechai Francis or Parnassus, who was a tax collector, a wealthy man. And they moved there to live under the Betzel Knofov, under the shelter of his mother's brother, his uncle. His uncle had a daughter who he married, so that worked out. And then he spent most of his short life, in Mitzrayim. He spent in Egypt. He studied Nigla, we'll see, under two very great personalities. One by the name Reb Betzalel Ashkenazi, who put together the Shitto Mekubetzes, a collection of many Rishonim on different Masechtas. He also has Responsa, the Shailas Tshuvas, Reb Betzalel Ashkenazi, very important. And in addition, the Arizal studied under the Radbaz, who was a big rabbi then in Egypt. And that's Nigla. As far as Kabbalah, it's less clear. There was somebody that he heard a little bit from while he was young, before he even went to Egypt. While he was in Egypt, at some point he got hold of some Kabbalistic manuscripts that excited him to no end. Some believe it was the Zohar. This is the mid-1500s, right? The printing press had just begun, but Sfarim were a rarity, and they were worth their weight, forget about gold, literally in diamonds. So it could be it was the Zohar, it could be it was something even more rare, but the Arizal then began to really commit himself to the learning of Kabbalah. Reb Chaim Vital says that the Arizal already had revelation of Ruach HaKodesh and of Eliyahu HaNovi while he was in Mitzrayim. But he was a quiet individual. Apparently there was some hut that he had near the water, and during the week, he would spend the week there in solitude. Shabbosim, he would come home to be with his wife, and he only spoke Lashon Kodesh on Shabbos. And during the week, he was misbeided in solitude. Him, God, Eliyahu, Anovi. There is speculation that some other rabbis joined as well. There's a fellow by the name of Rabbi Eliezer Ashkenazi, one of the most colorful characters of the last 1,000 years. Some say he would spend some time. Okay. Around the age of 35, the Arizal receives a revelation from a soul, it seems, from the palace of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in heaven, and tells him that you have a duty to travel to Eretz Yisrael, to Tzfas. There's a man there by the name of Reb Chaim Vital, who was about 8 years younger than the Arizal, and your destiny is to go and to teach him Kabbalah. Because last time round he taught you. What's the meaning of that riddle? Reb Chaim Vital writes, it's in the Shara Gilgulim, that the Arizal told him, you possess a spark of Rabbi Akiva's soul. And I'll prove it to you. 2 proofs. You love the Medrash Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. You're very fond of that Medrash because it's from Rabbi Eliezer ben Hurkanus, the Rebbe, one of the great Rebbes of Rabbi Akiva. And secondly, whenever we hear about a Yid that, God forbid, was tortured at the hands of the Goyim, it shakes you more than anybody else because you still recall subconsciously how you died at the hands of the Romans. So Reb Chaim Vital contained within himself a spark of the soul of Rabbi Akiva. And the Arizal, of course, contained within himself a spark of the soul of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Last time round, Rabbi Akiva taught Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's the meaning of the message that he received. The last time round, he taught you. This time round, you must go and teach him. And the Arizal went to Tzfas. He was there for about 2 years. The exact dates, hard to know. He was there by the Levaya of the Ramak, who passed away. It was Chof Gimel Tammuz, the end of Tammuz in the year 1570. The Arizal passes away tonight, 1572. So if he was there by the Levaya of the Ramak, he had to be there for at least 2 years, plus a couple weeks. And he was there by the Levaya of the Ramak. He gave a famous eulogy. Famous eulogy about if someone dies without sin, blame it on the sin of the tree, blame it on the snake. The Rebbe has a beautiful sikha about that, although there is much controversy if this hesped actually happened. There's sources that the Ramak gave it the exact same eulogy by the Levaya of his shver, Reb Sholem Shachner Vlublin, the great genius Reb Sholem Shachner. And historians discuss exactly who gave the hesped, but the Rebbe accepted that the Arizal gave it by the Ramak, and there's a beautiful sikha in the Chutei Sichos, really, going into the depth of that eulogy. We also know that the Ramak said, my successor will be the one that sees a pillar of light on the day of my burial. The one that can identify the pillar of light that goes in front of me by my Levi will be my successor. And the Arizal was the only one that could identify that. So says the Rameh Mifanu. He records this. So the Arizal was there when the Ramak passed away. It makes sense he was there a little bit earlier and he learned a little from the Ramak. So he would have been in Tzfas, I don't know, maybe 2.5 years. I've seen some say he was there for less than 2 years, but it's impossible because then he would have missed the Levaya.
Well, also they say that he was his Rebbe. Ramak was Arizal's Rebbe, so how could he not?
Who says? They. Okay, so you know what? I want to tell you something. At these shiurim, there's no they. Everyone has to be identified. Okay. So the Arizal passes away the 5th of 1572. Okay. Just to begin with a story about the Arizal. This story was recorded by the great scholar Rab Moshe Chagiz. Rab Moshe Chagiz passes away in the mid-1700s. He was the main antagonist against the Ramchal. The Ramchal suffered greatly at the hands of his antagonists, and probably the chief, most outspoken critic of Ramchal during the early 1700s was no doubt Rav Moshe Chagiz. He suspected Ramchal of Sabbateanism and other things. And Rav Moshe Chagiz was from an illustrious Sephardic family. His father, Rabbi Yaakov Chagiz, his Eider Rav Moshe Galanti, very, very choshev in mishpacha. And Rav Moshe Chagiz wrote many sforim. By the way, the Rebbe once commented that the Rabbeim felt in the discord between the Ramchal and Rav Moshe Chagiz that Rav Moshe Chagiz and his were actually more in the right. But one day hopefully we'll have a shir about that. I don't mean Chas v'Shalom to put down the Ramchal, that's not what I'm trying to say. But as far as the dispute over there, they felt that the Moshe Chagiz, because many of Ramchal's supporters, especially later on, felt that Moshe Chagiz was leading an unjustified crusade. But the Rabbeim felt that him and the rabbis of Venice, that they actually had some legitimate tinus. Anyhow, Rav Moshe Chagiz quotes a story. You ready for the story? That a Yid from Portugal, he was from a family of conversos, of people that had been forced into the conversion. Right, in 1492, there was an expulsion from Spain. In 1497, there was a forced conversion in Portugal. It was different. In Spain, they said leave. In Portugal, they said convert. There was no official option to leave, although some managed to. And so a Yid who was from a family of conversos, crypto Jews, secret Jews, managed to escape. He left Portugal, he came to Tzfas. During the mid-1500s, during the time of 1570, around there, because Arizal was there. And this guy was a simple man. He had no background. He probably grew up, baptized as a child, God forbid. That's just what happened. He didn't have much background, simple guy, but very well-meaning. Listen, he left Portugal in order to live in Tzfas as a Yid. And this guy davened in a shul. There were many shuls in Tzfas. And the rabbi once gave a drosha, a beautiful speech about the lechem haponim, the showbread that was in the Beis Hamikdash and how precious it was to Hashem. And this guy was so excited because the rabbi said, and now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, the Eibush doesn't have it, and the satisfaction is lost. And this guy was sitting there listening. He's like, you know what? I'm going to bring the bread back. He went home, he told his wife, this Friday you're baking challah, I'm bringing them to shul. So he brings these hot challahs, he brings them to shul, and he puts them in the Aron Kodesh, or next to the Aron Kodesh, a gift to Hashem. Lo and behold, right before Shabbos, the shamish or the gabbai comes into the shul to get the place ready. Oh, es schmeckt gut, right? There's nothing like a house for Shabbos. You smell the cholent, you smell the challah, unbelievable. Where's the smell coming from? Can't believe it. That in the Aron Kodesh is fresh challahs. She takes him home. The next morning, everyone comes to this shul, to daven, and the guy from Portugal sees the challahs are gone. The Eibusha took his carbon. He was over the moon. And from then on, every Friday, the same thing. He's bringing his challahs, the shamish is going home with the challahs, and lo and behold, Shabbos morning, the aron's empty. So, one Friday, while this Yid from Portugal was putting the challahs, and he would pray, obviously, after Eibusha for whatever he asked, Punt, the Rav, happened to be in the shul then. And he sees what's happening. And this guy was a smart man. He realized right away, he got the full story. And he gave it to the simple Jew. What, you're offering challahs to the Eibishter? You think the Eibishter eats your challahs? Like, how foolish can you be? It's not just foolish. What, you think the Eibishter eats? Like, how primitive? What, you're an idol worshiper, you're a pagan? And he gives him a whole drasha that this is not Judaism. The guy was horrified. He was floored. He was crying and completely broken. Shortly after, before Shabbos began, this Rav gets a knock on his door. And someone says, the Arizal. Now the Arizal unfortunately didn't become totally recognized during those 2 years. He was recognized, but it wasn't until after that that people really appreciated him to a greater extent. And I have evidence for that. It's not just they say, I have evidence, and I'll show you maybe soon. Anyhow, but he was still known, so that the Rav gets a message that the Arizal is calling for you. What was the message? The Arizal says, go home, pack your bags, tell your family goodbye, you're going upstairs. The guy said, what do you mean? The Arizal says, you were out of line. Since the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, the Eibishter never had so much pleasure like this guy's chalas. The Eibishter loved it. And then you broke this guy's heart. And the guy would never do it again. So from heaven it was decided you lost your chance to live. Apparently you passed away. So this story was told by the Moshe Chagiz. I will tell you, many, many Rabbanim in the world refused to accept the story. Yeah, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, story can't be. The guy was doing something wrong. How could he have given the Eibishter so much pleasure by doing an Aveira?
One part of the story that's not correct. It wasn't called Arizal at the time.
How could an Aveira cause the Eibishter so much nachas ruach? It can't be the Eibishter really took pleasure. Which is a wonder because we have so many stories. There's the Medrash by Rabbi Akiva that there's a guy who couldn't say Hashem Echad, he would say Hashem Acher. And Rabbi Akiva saw in heaven that the Eibush got so much pleasure from the huge blunder the guy was saying. So we have a lot of evidence of the Eibush getting pleasure from a Tzmimistic Yid. But I don't know, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, others said it can't be. And others said, what did the rabbi do wrong? He had to rebuke the guy. The guy was out of line. What did the rabbi do wrong? He shouldn't have told him off. He should have let this circus continue. Etc., etc. So many Rabbanim refuse to believe. Either maybe there's more details to the story we don't know. As it is, it can't be accepted. That's the view of many big people. And I don't know. We have so many stories where the Eibishter had nachas ruach from what simple people did, and when the Chachamim tried to stop them, they were held accountable in heaven. So anyhow, that's just an interesting story. Let's move. Join me in number 1. This is from the Sefer Charedim. Rebbe Lozer Ezkori, who was in Tzfas during the times of the Arizal. In Tzfas in 1570, you know who was there? Rabbi Yosef Kara was there. The Mabit was there. The Alshich, Rabbi Shloime El Kabatz, the Reishis Chochma. Exactly. The Radbaz had already come. He had made his way from Egypt. The Arizal, right? Reb Chaim Vital had been a student of the Ramak before. And says the Charedim, so here he says a story. This is a story of the Arizal being recorded at the time, okay? Says the Sefer Charedim, a story happened b'Doreinu with the Rav HaMekubal HaGadol, Kvoid Maren Rav Yitzchak Ashkenazi Zal. So he's recording this after the Arizal passed away. He looked at the face of a certain Talmud Chacham, and he said to him, Nishim b'fanech, I see on your face the sin of Tsar Baalei Chaim. I see on your face a sin. Tsar Baalei Chaim. Now this Talmud Chacham was mitztar, was very pained because he didn't know where he had faulted. What's Tsar Baalei Chaim? He was mefashvish bedover and he searched, he made an inquiry. Ad Shemotz, he found what it was. It was Ishta, his wife. She wouldn't feed the chickens in the morning. She would let them roam in their courtyard and in the street, right? Tzfas, 1500s, there's no cars in the street, right? The streets of Tzfas, probably have chickens there today, right? Chickens valganing in the gas in Tzfas. And Lanakir, so that they should, find their own food. So he realized this must be. Va'oz Tzivali instructed his wife, he said, Lasel and Gibul Hasubin, I want you to mix bran and with water every morning. We're feeding these chickens, they're going to have a good meal every morning. Now, after it was rectified, now the Varav lo yod, the Arizal wasn't told anything. He stakel b'fon, if he looked at the face of this Chacham and he said, Sor avoincha, the sin is gone. The Arizal said, Mo'ay Ador, tell me what it was. I can see whether there's a sin or not. What was the sin? So he told him. Now I've seen elsewhere that the name of this Chacham was Rab Moshe Galanti. He and his brother Moshe and Avram both came to Tzfas, and it was Rab Moshe. Either way, the Chareim doesn't say who it was. Probably purposefully, he concealed the identity. But here you have a story. Okay, so you have testimony that Arizal could look at your face and see if you sinned. He could also see if you did tshuva. Like there was a ma'aseh with the Tzemach Tzedek. There was a woman who, there was evidence she had been unfaithful, and the story was going around. Is she mutter to her husband or usher? And there was another Rebbe wrote to the Tzemach Tzedek that I'm looking at her face and I see no sin, so it means she never sinned. The Tzemach Tzedek said, no. You know why there's no sin anymore? She washed it away with her tears. She did tshuva, so that's why the sin is no longer detectable. But it happened, so she became usher to her husband. And I said, Arizal could see if there's a sin on your face, and he could see if it was cleansed. Fine. Now, if you look at number 3, an interesting tidbit from the Chidah in his Shem Magdolim. V'shamati mechacham echad, I heard from a sage, shekibel, he received from the elders before him, that Rabbeinu Arizal, acharei ptiris Rabbeinu Ramak, hischel lidrosh ktsas b'Kabbalah. That after the Ramak passed away, the Arizal began to be doirish in Kabbalah. Meaning, even if the Arizal spent time by the Ramak while the Ramak was alive, the Arizal kept a low profile. He kept a low profile. There is a story that said even while the Ramak was alive, there was some teaching of the Ramak that was obscure, and Reb Chaim Vital was given a beautiful explanation by the Arizal. It happened while the Ramak was alive. I don't take any achrayos for that story though. I just saw it once upon a time. But either way, says the Chidah, after the Ramak passed away, the Arizal started to lidrosh ksas. He started to, get the ball rolling teaching. Now, guess who was in Tzfas then? His old teacher, the Radbaz. He had been his student in Egypt. And now his Rebbe, now the Radbaz was a Kabbalist too. And now the Radbaz has met up again with his former student. Varav HaGodol, the great rabbi who was the teacher of his teacher, Rav Betzalel, the Radbaz taught the Arizal and also the Arizal's teacher, the Shittu Mekubetzis, the Radbaz Zatzal. Amalei, he told him, don't be doirish berabim benistoris. In Tzfas, when the Radbaz re-met with the Arizal, he said, do not openly teach Kabbalah. V'chozer pam acheres lidrosh. Now, did the Arizal listen? No. He did not listen to his Rebbe, the Radbaz. V'sholach likrois, and the Radbaz called him to the principal's office. The Radbaz called him back. What's going on? Now, now, in the interim, before the Arizal made it back to the Radbaz, Eliyahu Hanavi revealed to the Radbaz. We know the Radbaz would have revelation of Eliyahu. Now, apparently, Eliyahu told the Radbaz, leave the man alone. When the Arizal came, the Radbaz had a change of tone. He says, let it go, go with your strength and be doirish to passive truth, because for you it's a beautiful thing. So originally the Radbaz stopped him in his tracks. The Arizal didn't pay heed. The Radbaz summoned him, but then Eliyahu set the matter straight. Very interesting tidbit of the Chidah. Okay. So there is a tremendous amount of discussion about the relationship between the Arizal's teachings and the Ramak's teachings. Okay? So the Ramak, Reb Moshe Cordovero, he didn't live that long either, passed away around the age 48. And like I said, he passed away in 1570, the end of Tammuz. The Ramak was a legend. He was a revolution of Kabbalah. His Pardes Rimonim, the Orchard of Pomegranates, his Sefer Elima, his Yoker, he wrote so many Sfarim. In fact, the Kabbalists say that he wrote so much, He must have used hashbos hakulmas, using names of angels or spiritual names that you can get a pen to write for you. Right now you have that woman with the neural link who can think and the computer writes. So this is So the Ramak didn't just write a tremendous amount in quantity, but in quality. He made a seder, quoting many Kabbalists before him, mamish almost like in a nigla oifen. Pardes Rimonim is a pleasure to read for those that read it. I can't say I do too much. I do have the Sefer, but for some reason many of the pages just weren't printed. I have a lot of blank pages in the book. It was a faulty print, many of this. I try and read, gotta skip a page here, skip a page there. It's hard enough when you have all the words. Imagine you start guessing from one page to the other. My Zayda, my father's father, was a big fan of the Pardes Rimonim. I have so many memories of him sitting on his chair, reading the Sefer. So, because he was making a Seder, it's like an encyclopedia, trying to make everything very clear, going through the different opinions. It's a very clear way of what's the adjective? Methodological? Whatever it is. Methodological. Okay. Presentation of Kabbalistic concepts. Very thorough, very clear, very well built, very systematic. Fine. And then you have the Arizal. The Arizal himself barely wrote anything. Why is that? Look, jump to number 7. The Chidor writes, Sheshalu Talmidov, the Arizal's own students asked him, Amai Eino Mechaber Sefer Mechachmase Hagdele B'Kabbalah. The Arizal's own students asked him, why didn't you write anything? You know so much. You know what he answered? Lo Yahaya Lo Mitzias, it wouldn't be possible. Ki Teikuf Niftochim Lo Mayonas HaChochma. Immediately as he enters an idea, the well springs of wisdom just open up, and there is so much shining in his mind. Ein B'Kech Lichtay. Can't write. So when you write, you have to focus your thoughts. You have to narrow your thoughts and focus on the idea that you're writing. There was so much lichtigkeit, so much light, a godly intellect, godly chacham in his mind. He couldn't almost like narrow it down to the words he would write. It's interesting. The Rogatchover once said Shabbos is very difficult for him because he can't write. He loves writing, and apparently he said for this exact reason, that when you can't write, there's so many ideas in your mind. When you write, you can finally get a clarity. It like forces you to focus on something. So it's for the same reason, but an opposite conclusion. Anyhow, right. Shasha. That's what Vafilu k'shahaya medaber. Even when Arizal would speak, it was difficult for him to speak, to narrow his thoughts on the one idea that he would share with his words. It was a toirach limtzoit sinur cotton to find that narrow dialect, to hone in on the one idea, to focus on the words that would express that idea. But he did. The Chidah says Arizal did put a few things pen to paper. When in the beginning of his prophecy, so to speak, he wrote a pirush on Safra Tetzniusa. That's a small portion of the Zohar, and some in Yonim in Kabbalah and Reb Chaim Vital gathered them together, etc. So the Arizal was asked by his students, Rebbe, why didn't you write anything? It's not possible. In contrast, the Ramak didn't stop writing. We have so much from the Ramak. And it's very interesting that in Hatomim was a journal printed by Lubavitch's. Friedrich Rebbe was very involved. The Rebbe himself was involved. In the 1930s, and in Hatomim, the Friedrich Rebbe released some letters known as the Michtevei Gniza, the hidden letters of the Baal Shem Tov and his students, and there's a lot of discussion about the accuracy of those letters, but in one of the letters, which has the Baal Shem Tov's sign out, Baal Shem Tov allegedly wrote, the Baal Shem Tov says, look in number 2, this is a letter that the Rebbe wrote to somebody, that in Ois 55, the Baal Shem Tov says that you know what the shit of Chassidus is? The leis asar ponimine. There's no place void of Hashem, even in lowly matters. And the Baal Shem Tov writes, this is the shit of the Ramak. The Baal Shem Tov wrote in this letter that my opinion of Chassidus, that Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, is the opinion of the Ramak. So somebody writes to our Rebbe or Maksha, someone asks, this is the opinion of the Arizal, is it not? Like the Alter Rebbe writes in Geras HaKodesh, the Arizal also believes. So why did the Baal Shem Tov say that Chassidus is based on the Ramak and not the Arizal? So you know what the Rebbe answered? Look at the beautiful answer. Yes, the Rebbe answers. Number 2, the 4th line. It's known the idea of Tzimtzum is not found anywhere in the Ramak's Kabbalah. Meaning the original Tzimtzum. We once had a long shir about this, the primordial black hole, and we went through all the many opinions. The Arizal definitely spoke to his students about the Tzimtzum Harishon, the original contraction of light to make space for the worlds. This is not found by the Ramak. By the Ramak, there was no big leap between God and creation. From level to level to level to level, when the light was diminished until it came down here. The Arizal believes in the quantum leap, that there was a dilug, there was a big leap, and that was the Tzimtzum. So the Rebbe says like this, where do you find Tzimtzum? It's not in the Kabbalah of the Ramak, it's in the Kabbalah of the Arizal. And the Inyan of Tzimtzum was understood by many to be literal. Nos and Mokum, to a mistake of many Chachamim, to understand Tzimtzum Kipshutai. The Mishnah's Chassidim, chief amongst them, Rabbi Manuel Chayriki, one of the greatest Kabbalists of the last 500 years, the Mishnah's Chassidim, he believes very strongly that the Arizal's Tzimtzum is literal. God removed himself in order to create space. And the Vilna Gaon and others, etc. But says the Rebbe, so in the Arizal's Tzimtzum, all of a sudden it's the Tzimtzum controversy. Was it real? Masha Enkin Lefi Kabbalah's Haramak. Melachatchila, there's no Tzimtzum. In the world of the Ramak, God never, there's no Tzimtzum to talk about. Ein Makom Litos, there's no mistake. So since that letter that you're talking about from the Baal Shem Tov was written to answer Kashyas in the most simple fashion, so the Baal Shem Tov mentioned the Ramak. Because in the world of the Ramak, there's no discussion of God removing himself. Of sure Hashem is everywhere. As the Zohar says, there's nothing empty of Hashem, no place void. Al Pisa, everyone's made it that even the lowest beings, God is there too. But in the Arizal, such machlokes, Mishnah Chassidim, Shomer Emunim, etc., etc. That's what the Rebbe says. Very interesting. Well, I found that interesting. Okay, even if now. If you look at number 5, join me in number 5 was a sikha. Again, about this discussion of Ramak versus Arizal. Why am I saying versus? Who am I to say that? Because there were many Kabbalists that believed that as great as Ramak was, the Arizal was just something else altogether. The Ramak was a revolution, but the Arizal was a revolution on the heels of a revolution. Similar to how we look at the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov was a revolution, general Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe on the heels of that created or revealed Chassidus Chabad. The Friedrich Rebbe is a mimer where he said similar to Moshe Rabbeinu and Avraham Avinu. Who was the real revolution? Avraham Avinu, he started everything. And when Moshe felt that he was equal to Avraham, Hashem said, "B'makom gedolim al tamid." The Medrash says, remember where you are. On the other hand, Moshe took things to a place where Avraham Avinu didn't take them, obviously. Moshe gave us a Torah. And the Friedrich Rebbe described a similar about the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid were like the Ovis setting the stage. And the Alter Rebbe was a revolution on the heels of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid. That was a mimer, the Friedrich Rebbe, a Poder B'Sholem mimer. It's mamish similar to the Arizal and the Ramak. The Ramak, was a blitz of radiance of teaching Kabbalah, and then the Arizal just picked up. Apparently, the Vilna Gaon said, where the Ramak ended, the Arizal begins. So in a way, you could think that once you have the Arizal's teachings, maybe the Ramak is no more relevant. God forbid to say that. But if you look at number 5, the Rebbe in a Fabrengen, in Tafshin Chav Gimel, the Yud Shvat, he says, V'hinei, B'negei l'Kabbalah Ramak, who was before the Arizal, we find in the Sforim of Mekubalim Achronim, who are mamatim b'malosai. They diminish the mile of the Ramak. Shaloi be'erech l'gabe machsha ochsu mimenu b'yomav. The Rebbe is saying that Ramak was a bigger legend while he was alive. Now he doesn't get the same credit. Why? Because while he was alive, it was before the revelation of the Arizal, so he was king. But once the Arizal came, the Ramak's like, he lost, he's no longer in the spotlight. So says the Rebbe, yes, there were Mekubalim who felt that. That's not the opinion of the Alter Rebbe. Avol Rabbeinu Azokin Mevi, he brings from the Pardes Rimonim, which is a Kabbalah that Ramak in many places. Uchiyadu, and the Rebbe says, like it's explained elsewhere, the Kabbalah of the Ramak is inside the Kabbalah of the Arizal, like the idea of Bichlal Mosayim Mana. Within 200, you have 100. In other words, the Ramak is not considered not relevant, God forbid. The Arizal's perfect Kabbalah contains inside of it the Ramak. Now, you should learn the Ramak Sforim to see it spelled out. The truth is, the Ramak Sforim, Pardes Rimonim compared to Eitz Chaim, is an easier read. That's a fact. The Pardes Rimonim is an easier read to Eitz Chaim. So read Pardes Rimonim, because the ideas stand true forever. In the Arizal's Kabbalah, you have them, plus the Arizal had his Tosefes. And look how the Rebbe finishes off. V'loi chas v'sholem kedivrei ha'achronim hanal. He used the word chas v'sholem. So the view of the Rabbeim, and one thing I just want to say tonight is that there were many, many great Kabbalists of the last 500 years. The Rabbeim were also Kabbalists. The Baal Shem Tov, they were huge Kabbalists. And they were also Rebbes. Yeah, that's the greatest title. But they were also great Kabbalists. They were Rosh Yeshiva. They were Gaonim. Incredible Talmidei Chachamim. But they were also Kabbalists. And they should also be viewed as such. On top of that, they were a Rebbe, and a Rebbe includes everything. But also Kabbalist. And the view of the Alter Rebbe was that the Arizal is complementing the Ramak, not disregarding. Okay. Reb Menachem Azariah Fanu, whose yard site was today, was very, very close with the Ramak. The Rameh was only 22 when the Ramak passed away. But during those years, the Rameh developed a very warm relationship with the Ramak. Now, they never met. The Rameh is in Italy. The Ramak is in Sfas and Eretz Yisrael. But there was correspondence. In fact, the Rameh had a daughter. He named his daughter Eilima, after one of the great Sfarim of the Ramak. He named his child after one of the Sfarim of the Ramak. They were very close. And when the Ramak passed away, the Rameh got in touch with the Ramak's almana, widow, to buy from her manuscripts of her husband she didn't want to sell. She didn't want to sell. Until the Rameh had to hire, he hired the help of Rabbi Yosef Kaira and Rabbi Moshe Alshich to insist by the almana that she give up her manuscripts, just for him to print, because the Rameh was very wealthy, and in Italy he had his own printing press. In fact, he writes, without no electricity, it was a mechanical printer, but the Rameh says that you're allowed to mechanically make a get. And the Rameh was asked about it. He said, listen, I know the laws of Gittin, and I know how a printer works, and I can tell you that it's halachically okay. He was a big Rav as well, and so the Rameh wanted to get these manuscripts so he could print them, and the Chidor records somewhere exactly how much money he paid to the Rabbi Yosef Kaira. It was more than what he paid to the Alshich. All the details are there, and so the Rameh was very close with the Ramak. There's no question about that. And what about the Rameh and the Arizal? We're going to talk about that. You think their yard sites hit and we're not going to talk about how they merge? Of course we're going to talk about that. All right, but hold your horses. Hold your horses. Fine.
What year did they pass away?
1620.
Much later.
Yes, many years later, almost 50 years after the Arizal. The same years of Chaim Vital. The Chaim Vital and the Rameh pass away the same year. Okay, join me in number 6. So you have the Arizal. The Arizal reached heights that Reb Chaim Vital describes in his in one of his introductions to one of his Sfarim. He describes the greatness of the Arizal, the chokhmah that he had, that there was nothing the man didn't know. He knew everything that's happening, and he could look at you and see everything about your soul, etc., etc. So how did the Arizal become so great, literally eclipsing, the Kabbalists before him? We're going to see soon that by the Rabbeim, there was almost a direct hemshich of Rashbi to the Arizal. Even though between the Rashbi and the Arizal, you could be certain there were tremendous Kabbalists. Amongst the Amoraim, those that were creating golems, we know that they were using Sefer Yetzirah. Amongst the early Rishonim, Reb Chaim Vital himself talks about the Raiva, Reb Yitzchak Sagi. We had a shir a number of years ago about the history of the Kabbalistic manuscripts, and we discussed many of the great Kabbalists before the Arizal. And yet somehow the Arizal just eclipsed all of them, if we can say that. Like, how did that happen? So number 6, the Chidah in his Sefer Midbar Kedemus posits the following theory out of left field. Now I'm saying that because he himself is going to say it's from left field. Look what he says in number 6. Vehein ata, b'shegam imotze yimotze mitzharoitze liskadish. These days, what if somebody wants to become holy and separate from darchei ha'olam? You don't want to be so involved in day-to-day happenings of everything Olam Haza has to offer, and you want to be a bishul hecher, be a little bit removed from the mundane of planet Earth. So the Chidah says, listen, I'll tell you the truth. Afshe yitrach terech gadol. You can work tirelessly, but lo yal biyadi, this doesn't work. You want to become holy, and it's just so difficult. Why? I'll tell you why, he says, because the tumas, there's so much impurity, new and old, that us and our fathers, they've just muddied us. Because being pure is holding back our strive. Literally, being halachically tahor is holding back our desire to become halik. And with all the Torah and the Kushi, we only end up being successful like a fox. Says the Chidah, it's obvious to me that the Arizal became purified with the ash of the Parah Adumah through Eliyahu Hanavi. He believes Eliyahu Hanavi brought to the Arizal some real ash of the Parah Adumah and purified him. And then Ruach HaKodesh rested upon him lahafli. Now says the Chidah, v'agam, even though loyris yikos of remez mizeh, I never saw this anywhere, v'loy shamati. The Chidah says, I have not 1 ounce of evidence for this. Nonetheless, Libya, my heart tells me that the Arizal, this happened, and he concealed it. Helam nimratz l'roi v'anvus nasei. He's so sure it happened, and the Arizal didn't say. Why didn't Arizal say it? He wanted to conceal it, out of humility. But this was the secret of why the Arizal reached places that no one reached before him. This is the Chidah's theory, incredible. Eliyahu brought him real ash of the Parah Adumah, he was purified. He says, I have no source, I didn't hear, I didn't see, my heart tells me. Very interesting. It's well known there was something else that Arizal had that led him to greatness. It was his simcha shel mitzvah. The joy, the Rabbeim mentioned, simcha shel mitzvah, joy of a mitzvah. The Arizal didn't just serve Hashem, the Arizal served the Eibishter with joy. In fact, the Mishnah Berurah quotes this in the laws of Simchas Torah, when he speaks about the importance of dancing. Simchas Torah. No one's dancing, I'm going to go dance. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you got to dance. He says the Simcha Shel Mitzvah was the secret of the Arizal. He brings it. There's another thing brought by some Kabbalists, that the Arizal's Hatzlacha came from his focus on making brachas. When he made brachas, he had kavanah during brachas. Now, what kavanah are we talking about? Are we talking about that? Don't know. But having kavanah by making birchas hanenin, by a shahakal, by a hadam, that's where it came from. So either it came from the birchas hanenin kavanah, or from Simcha Shel Mitzvah, or says the Chida, no. This was Eliyahu brought him the Efer, the Paraduma. Fine. Turn over the page, please. In number 9, this is Maimer the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he quotes a well-known story. There's a well-known story that the Arizal was masig one time b'sheinas tzaharayim during an afternoon sleep on a Shabbos. It was Parshas Balak Ubilam. Parshas Balak Ubilam. Balak Ubilam. And when he awoke, he told his student that if I would reveal this to you, to reveal to you what I saw, it would take 60 or 80 years. Now this story is it's in the Pri Eitz Chaim, the story is there. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says it's because, how could that be that speech would take 80 years to reveal what he saw in a couple hours? Because it was b'chinas re'iyah de chachma, what he saw in heaven. You could see something and talk about it for hours, okay? That's just us. You can see something for 30 seconds and probably talk about it for hours. If you know how to, if you know how to be ma'irich, you can find things. When the Arizal saw things in heaven, his soul saw, it could take 80 years to reveal it. So does that mean that Arizal was like a type of prophet? So if you look at number 10, this is in Tanya, in the Geras HaKodesh, Siman Yud Tes. The Alter Rebbe asks a kasha that Reb Chaim Vital, as a student of the Arizal, reveals that Moshe Rabbeinu's prophecy was in the world of Atzilus, but he could only see the exterior, let's say, of Chochmah, once it was enclosed in the bottom 4 spheres, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. He got the pnimius of Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. He got the inner light of those spheres. The above spheres, only the external element of them, and only once they were enclosed in Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. That's what the Arizal says. That's fine. But here's the problem. The Arizal would speak in detail about what goes on even above the world of Atzilus. So does that mean that the Arizal reached a deeper level of prophecy, or he was able to reach higher levels of spirituality than Holy Moses? So fragt Alter Rebbe number 10, it's mamash a wonder. It says, "V'loi kam novi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe." There'll never be a prophet like Moshe. How could it be? Eich hisig ha'Arizal? How could the Arizal have grasped Yosher mimenu more than Moshe? And he was doirish many drushim in the pnimius of the higher spheres, even in spheres and madregas rabbis above Chachma and Kesher of Atzilus, even above not just Chachma of Atzilus, but even above Kesher of Atzilus. And he was able to, he was able to be in touch with the pnimius of those levels. So the Alter Rebbe explains there's a big difference between the Chachma of the Arizal and the prophecy of Moshe. Acho Inyan is partial to move, and everyone understands. There's a huge difference, a terrific difference between the grasp of Chachmi Emes like Rashbi and the Arizal. See, straight from the Rashbi to the Arizal. By the way, in some Litvischer circles, they believe the Ramchal was also a direct hemshech of the Rashbi. The Ramchal wrote a Zoyar Tinyana, a second Zoyar. He claimed that a Malach revealed to him that you have to pick up where Rashbi left off. So the Litvischer world also, some of them look at the Ramchal as a hemshech of Rashbi, just like the Rabbeim looked at the Arizal as almost the successor of the Rashbi, if you could say that. But says the Alter Rebbe that the Rashbi and the Arizal is Hasogas Chochma V'das, their understanding with their wisdom and their Moshe Rabbeinu and other prophets. It's a prophecy. In the Chumash, it's called Re'iyah. They saw. Moshe was told V're'isa Sachairai. Yeshaya said, I saw God. Now, it doesn't mean physically with their physical eye, but it's a much greater vision. When a Navi sees, it's a much loftier experience. And Taka Moshe with his Re'iyah can only see Netzach Hod Yesod Malchus of Atzilus, to get the pnimius of them. He can't have a re'iyah in the pnimius of the higher spheres. But the Arizal and Rashbi are being masig in chokhmah. Understanding something, that you can go well above. Because they're not seeing it in a way of re'iyah. It's from a distance, it's just understanding it and grasping it. That you can reach even greater madregas. So someone wrote a letter to the Rebbe. Does that mean that in Chochmah, though, the Arizal reached higher than Moshe? In other words, you're telling me Moshe's Nevuah kind of capped in the lowest spheres of Atzilus as far as their pnimius. But what about Moshe's Chochmah? Did Moshe reach in his Chochmah as far as the Arizal reached? That was the question. And the Rebbe said, yes, he did. In other words, the Rebbe says, yes, he did. So the Arizal did not have an up on Moshe Rabbeinu. Even though our Alter Rebbe there says that the Gemara in Bava Basra, Chacham Odif Minavi, a wise man is greater than a prophet, that the Arizal had an up over Moshe, because through his Chacham he can reach higher than Moshe can reach through his Nevuah. But the Rebbe says that's true. But Moshe also could go in the path of Chacham and he could reach the same levels that the Arizal reached. That's what the Rebbe writes in a letter. But nonetheless, there was a question, maybe the Arizal reached even higher than Moshe in his Chachma. The Medrash Rabbah says clearly Rabbi Akiva did. The Medrash Rabbah says clearly that things that were not revealed to Moshe were revealed to Rabbi Akiva. Anyhow, so now that we're starting to get a feel, though, of who we're talking about, trying to compare him, did he know more than Moshe or not? In number 8, there is a letter of the Rebbe, which is a... Somebody wrote to the Rebbe that he has an old manuscript where there's a mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, where number 8, concerning the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mizrich, and the Alter Rebbe. And what it said there was the following. The Baal Shem Tov received his Kabbalah from where? Well, when he was a younger, he joined a group of Nistarim, of great hidden tzaddikim, Kabbalists, and he spent many years with them, studying from many of them. Although it didn't take long until he became the leader of the group, but he was studying from them. In addition, of course, from the age of 26 to 36, he spent 10 years studying with Achia Hashiloni. From his birthday when he was 26, in Chayelu, until he was 36, he learned with Achia Hashiloni. The soul of Achia came down to this world to learn with the Baal Shem Tov. And this is something which the Rebbe said we can't overestimate. There's no way to overestimate it because it's so crucial. The fact that the Baal Shem Tov received his tradition from Achia Hashiloni, who was the Rebbe of Eliyahu Hanavi. Where did the Arizal get his tradition from? Eliyahu Hanavi. So that Tzemach Tzedek apparently wrote in this old manuscript that the Baal Shem Tov has an up over the Arizal, because the Arizal received from Eliyahu Hanavi, who was only a student of Achia. The Baal Shem Tov received directly from Achia Hashiloni. When the Baal Shem Tov was younger, by the way, he had revelation of Eliyahu. When he was 16, he had revelation of Eliyahu, and the Baal Shem Tov said, it was my birthday when I turned 16, but that wasn't my first time. It was the first time seeing Eliyahu alone. Before then, I had revelation along with other people. When I was 16, the first time to have him alone. It was only 10 years after that he was able to get to Achia Hashiloni. So the Tzemach Tzedek allegedly wrote that the Baal Shem Tov received directly from Achia. The Arizal got from Eliyahu, a student of Achia. And for the same reason, the Maggid of Mizrich has an up over Reb Chaim Vital. Because the Maggid is only 2 stages from Achia Hashiloni. Reb Chaim Vital is 3. Eliyahu, the Arizal, and him. So someone asked the Rebbe, did you hear about this? So the Rebbe says in the second line of number 8, this is a letter in Igros Kodesh, the Rebbe says, I did not hear this. I never heard this before you wrote this to me, he tells the person. But, sapast, it makes sense. Ru'uyim hadvorim la'imram. The words are fitting to be said. Now, even though not everyone can say this, not everyone can say this. And I did not hear this from the Frierdiker Rebbe, and I did not find this written in any of the manuscripts that I have, so I can't verify the story. But, like I said before, it makes sense. It's definitely possible that Tzemach Tzedek wrote this. The idea sounds right, and it makes sense, and that Tzemach Tzedek definitely has the capacity to write this. But the Rebbe says, I can't verify it. But the idea definitely has room to be said. As great as the Arizal was, the Baal Shem Tov has a milah that he was able to get from the source, the Kli edition. Fascinating. Okay, so where are we holding with all this? So the Arizal was an incredibly great man, okay? Nobody disagrees. And nobody in their normal sanity. There are some Meshugoyim today who scream and utter absolute nonsense. Absolute rubbish, and they're not even worth mentioning. The Arizal, who's greater than the Arizal? The Mogen Avraham in his commentary on Shulchan Aruch. It's a halachic commentary. He's often quoting from the Arizal. The Arizal's words carry a lot of weight. And we'll get to that in a moment. The Arizal as a rabbi, the Arizal as a posek. But I got to throw in another story about the Arizal. In Sfas, there were two friends. Tayir Chaverim. And they were good friends when they were younger. They got married. They opened a business together. It was very successful. One of them was blessed with children. The other one was not. And unfortunately, there was some envy between the wives. You know, the wife that didn't have kids was extremely broken, and the other wife became paranoid that her friend was jealous of her. Unfortunately, their relationship soured tremendously. They terminated the partnership. They both opened up on their own, and the one who had kids, he had no parnasa, was awful. The childless one was making it big. And the one who had no parnasa was becoming extremely envious of his friend. And the rift just grew wider and wider and wider. The one who was well-to-do without kids would often ask the Arizal for a bracha to have a child. And one time he received the affirmative. And a year later, he had a son. And the bris was called at a nice hall. Everyone came because this guy was a big Baal Stocker. Everyone loved him. And it was so beautiful. He finally had a child and he had a boy, and it was just beautiful, beautiful. There was one person who wasn't by the bris, and that was his old best friend, who had now turned into his nemesis. And unfortunately, this friend, the envy and the fact that he was poor now, it got to him, and he became insane, at least to some degree. You'll see what happened. So it's the day of the bris, and they're waiting. Everyone's there. Everyone wants to dig in, the bagels, the lox, the cream cheese, machaya. I think there were 5 or 8 different types of cream cheese at the bris. And, but you got to wait for the bris. It's getting later and later. Why are they waiting? They're waiting for the Arizal. The guy's not going to do the bris without the Rebbe, without the Arizal being there. He's waiting. They're waiting and waiting. Till finally, mamish, like the end of the day, the Arizal comes in. So the bris was done. And all of a sudden, there's a huge ruckus in the kitchen. In the kitchen, there was a big pot full of fish that had been cooked. This big black dog had jumped into this cauldron. And now and I think the dog even died in the hot fish, and it was what a catastrophe. If they would have done the bris 10 minutes earlier. So the Arizal told everyone, let me tell you what this is all about. He says, you got to know something. First of all, this black dog wasn't just any dog. I was planning to come to the bris earlier, right? The Arizal wasn't always, he's not like me, he's not always running late. He was coming to but as he was going down the road, he came across a dog. And the dog wouldn't move. The dog says, Rebbe, help me. The Arizal could speak to animals. Arizal said, well, what do you want? You want a bone? What would you like? What type of meat would you like? He says, Rebbe, you know who I am? I am Gehazi from Elisha. So what are you doing here as a dog? He says, Rebbe, in the story in Nach and Malachim, Gehazi was when the boy, the son of the Shunamis, who the Zohar identifies as Habakkuk, was had passed, and the mother had come to Elisha for help. Elisha gave Gehazi his stick. He said, take it, and with this you'll revive the boy. Now Gehazi comes, he uses it, doesn't work. So Elisha himself has to come and personally resurrect the boy. You ever wondered why it didn't work? Like Elisha gave him, why didn't it work? So Gehazi said, I'll tell you why. Elisha had imbued in that stick the power to be Machaya Mason. Now Elisha told me, well, on your travel, don't speak to anyone, don't talk to anyone. I didn't speak to him, but I wanted to see if the stick had the power to resurrect. I saw a dead dog on the side of the road. I touched it with the stick, the dog got back up. The problem is I had used the energy of the stick, that's why it didn't work. And as rectification for that, my soul had to come back in the body of a black dog. And the dog told Arizal, please, help me. Get me out of here, help me. Arizal, today's your lucky day. He told the dog. Because today you can give up your life by saving many people from eating poison. Why? Arizal says, the whole town pretty much was by the bris. There was one guy missing. The old friend turned nemesis of the Baal Simcha. This old friend had become so insane and so envious. He, while no one was watching, had gone into the kitchen and poured poison into the big pot of fish. And by the dog jumping into the fish and dying in the hot cauldron and not eating the fish saved everybody's life. And now Gehazi's soul had a rectification. Okay, I just have to throw that in. Okay. Okay. So here's the thing. The Arizal is a Kabbalist, chief Kabbalist. And but what about the Arizal as a posek? The Arizal was a rabbi. He was a rabbi. So here's the shaila. If the Arizal gives a psak and is against another Rav, how do you look at it? It's two Rabbanim arguing? Is it a Rav versus a Makubal? What do you b'chlal do when a posek argues with a Kabbalist? So we once had a shir when Halacha and Kabbalah collide, and you can many examples and details when the Gemara seems to be at odds with the Zohar, or when a Rishon is at odds with the Zohar, or when a posek is at odds with the Makubal. So it's known that the Alter Rebbe later in life said, in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe in a number of instances followed the Kabbalists. So he was asked, don't you write on Simon Chav Hey and Tefillin that when Kabbalah and Halacha collide, you follow Halacha? So Alter Rebbe said, that's what the poskim say. The Halachists tell you when a posek and Makubal collide, you follow the poskim. The Kabbalists tell you to follow the Mekubalim. But here's the thing. When a posek and a halachist collide, but when a posek and a Kabbalist collide, the Kabbalist, what if he's also a Rav? What, anything he says has to be downgraded because he's also a Kabbalist? I would say, fakert, if he is certain about a halacha, he should get 2 points. A, als halacha, B is Kabbalah. Whereas the other Rav doesn't see the way it is Kabbalistically. So it makes sense to say, on surface level, if a Makubal argues with a posek, you should follow the Makubal. Unless, if the Makubal tells you that what I'm telling you is only Kabbalistically, and I'm aware that al pi nigla it's not pashut, then I hear that, so it's a posek versus a Kabbalist. But if the Kabbalist tells you that I am certain about this, so his eyes as a rabbi are saying it as well. So he's saying it al pi halacha and al pi Kabbalah. So why would you follow the other posek? And this came up in a well-known debate between Rabbi Yosef Kaira and the Arizal about the bracha hanoisin layoyev koyach. In Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Kaira says there are those that say you should say hanoisin layoyev koyach, but I don't think you should say because it's not found anywhere in Gemara. It's a made-up bracha. The Rishon, the Samag quotes it, but said Rabbi Yosef Kaira, I don't think you should be saying it. The Ramah says the minhag by Ashkenazim is to say it. Fine. So if you're Ashkenazi, you follow the Ramak. If you're a Sephardi, you would think Rabbi Yosef Kaira says, I don't think you should say it. Ein Divreim Nirin, I don't think you should do it. Comes the Chidah, and the Chidah says, if you're Sephardi, you're saying Hanoisen Layoev Koyach. You know why? Because the Arizal says to say it. The Chidah says, Beis Yosef versus the Arizal, it's like Beis Shammai versus Beis Hillel. You follow the Arizal. And he says, you know why? He says, had Rabbi Yosef Kaira truly known the greatness of the Arizal, or had he known that the Arizal said a certain halacha, he for sure would have agreed to it. It must be the Beis Yosef wasn't fully aware that the Arizal said you should say Anoisen Layoev Koyach. And we'll see this inside in just a moment. In addition, the Knesset Hagdolah, Reb Chaim ben Venesti, the great poskim in Turkey, says, there's a story. Someone came and said, I heard from Rabbi Yosef Kaira before he passed away that everyone should say Hanoisen Layoev Koyach. Somebody came and said he heard from Rabbi Yosef Kaira, Hanoisen Layoev Koyach you should say. He changed his opinion. And the Knesset Hagdolah says, I'm sorry, I'm not going to, if the Shulchan Aruch says clearly not to do it, right, and some guy has a story that he heard, I'm not going to base halacha based on that tale. But the Chidah says between the tale, Rabbi Yosef Kaira himself said, you should say the bracha. And the fact that the Arizal said to say the bracha, as far as you should say the bracha. That's what the Chidah says. Okay? If you look in number 11, this is a letter from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And this mamish, very surprising. Let's look what he says. Hine, b'makim that the Rabbanei HaMekubalim hold different than the poskim. So he says, what do you do? Said Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, it's a machlekes. He says if Mekubalim argue with poskim, it just remains a stalemate. Lo yatzadam, it doesn't leave machlekes. In other words, what do you do? Either Mekubalim or poskim, but it remains a debate. He said it's known the words of the Chidah and the Birkei Yosef. The Chidah says about Maran, right? The Maran, Rabbi Yosef Kaira in the fourth line of number 11. There are those that say to say Anoisen Layoev Koyach, but I don't think you should do it. And the Chidah says now the minig is to make the bracha, because the Arizal says to do it. And the Chidah says, we accepted upon ourselves the psakim of Rabbi Yosef Kaira. Kimlon, we have a tradition. If Rabbi Yosef Kaira would have seen the words of the Arizal, he would have said to make the bracha. In addition, the Knesset Hagdolah says, there's someone who said Rabbi Yosef Kaira changed his opinion. That's what you should do, not like the Pri Chodosh. The Pri Chodosh writes in his comments on that halacha that, there are many Sfardim that make Hanoisen Layoev Koyach, except for a few people that don't, and I'm one of those that don't. Which the Chidah himself questions that the Pri Chodosh was a big follower of the Arizal. Why didn't he follow him over here? So says Rabbi Ovadia, v'heinif yodai shenis. The Chidah says it again in Sefer Tov Ayin, that the Beis Yosef and other rabbis did not know 1% of the Gedulas of the Arizal. They didn't know 1% of the true greatness of the Arizal. Had he known the true greatness, and had he known the Arizal's position on this bracha, he would have agreed. Says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. Yes.
In the same city?
Yes.
So how did he know?
Because the Arizal was only there for 2 years. There were so many big guns over there. He didn't know the true greatness of the Arizal.
But he didn't hear the Arizal.
No. Of what?
Of Hanoisen Layoev.
No. There were lots of shuls. Everyone's doing their own thing. Do you know my opinion on Hanoisen Layoev Koyach?
Sure.
And we dive in the same shuls. He says it's true that the Arizal passed away. Rabbi Yosef Kaira passes away 1575. 3 years after the Arizal. He says, V'yitachin, it's possible, look what he says, it could be that after the Arizal passes away, that afterwards the Beis Yosef heard from the Arizal students that he's to make the bracha, and that's why he changed his opinion, right? The story of this one guy saying that Beis Yosef changed his opinion, it could be because at some point he got wind of the Arizal's take. Look at a line later, the Stei Chemed believes the same thing, like he writes in Michtav L'Chizkiyahu. The Goin Rabbi Yosef Chaim, that's the Ben Ish Chai, writes in Rav Pa'olim, and so in Ben Ish Chai, that we don't say Sofik Brachas Lahakol when it's Beis Yosef versus Arizal. It becomes Vadai like the Arizal. Go down about 5 lines from the bottom. He says Rabbi Vad Yosef, V'anochi ba'ani loy zochisi lav, and says Rabbi Vad Yosef, I was not zoche to understand the above Rabbanim. How do they know that the Beis Yosef would have just flipped on a dime because he hears the Arizal says different? That if he would have seen the words of the Ari, he would have said like him? He says, Im kol hakavod, with all due respect to the Arizal, the crown upon everybody's head. But we paskin loy b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. Who cares that he was a Kabbalist? It's irrelevant. He's a rabbi, like any other rabbi. So if you argue the Beis Yosef, you should say, Sofik brachas lakol. Like when you're not sure what to make a bracha, you don't do it. Where does it come from? To leave the words of the Poskim Amu for some, like the Beis Yosef, and to grab the Arizal as if it's halacha l'Moshe Missinai, the Arizal reigns supreme. It's loy b'shamayim here. His knowledge of what goes on upstairs is not relevant. And he says, okay, fine. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a similar sentiment in number 12. Look at number 12, Ikras Moshe. B'shaloscha, you ask, says Rav Moshe, how should the Mishnah Bruder paskins if someone is up all night, you don't sleep, what do you do in the morning about Alikai Neshama, about Birchas HaTorah, Ma'av Shena, right? What do you do about these brachas? It's a big machlokas haposkim, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. Now, the Achronim write in Hilchos Tefillin, whenever you have a machlokas of poskim, you can use Kabbalah to help sway to one side or the other. Kabbalah can help sway the scales. And the Arizal says you make these brachas if you are up all night. So he should sway the scales. Says Rav Moshe, it's pashut. When we say Kabbalah could be machriya, it's talking about the Zohar or the Tikkunim that come from Tanoim. But the Arizal's writings, Pri Etz Chaim, it's very great. But it's not greater than a regular posuk. The Arizal is not the Zohar. The Arizal is just an individual. He's like any posuk. And he says more than that. You're allowed to argue on him in Kabbalah as well. Rav Moshe Feinstein says not only, in other words, about this discussion, should you make new brachas when you're up all night, you have poskim to the right and the left. The Arizal is just another name, so throw him on the side of those that say you should make it. But he can't just be used as the Kabbalah to decide one way or the other. But more than that, you can argue on him even in Kabbalah.
Argue what?
You're allowed to argue with the Arizal in Kabbalah, says Rav Moshe Feinstein. He's just an individual. Now, the Rabbeim definitely don't believe this is correct. As maybe we'll see some sources. And says Rav Moshe, V'loi lonu yasmi, we're orphans of orphans. We're going to say who's greater than who. And therefore, the Arizal's opinion should hold more weight. Lachen, therefore, the Arizal's words carry no more weight than any other Rebbe, than any other Achron. The Imkain, since there's a machloikus about making these brachas when you stayed up all night, Sofik brachas l'akol, v'lachin you should hear them from somebody else, etc. Fine. So Reb Moshe Feinstein and Reb Avadia Yosef say, what's the whole hoo-ha of the Arizal? He's just another rabbi. Now, the Vilna Gaon writes in his commentary to Mishlei, and the Rebbe mentioned this, I can't tell you how many times, just because I can't tell you. But no, really, there's letters, there's sichos, the Rebbe mentioned this vart, who knows how many times. That the Vilna Gaon said a person has no right to paskin halacha down here unless you see the way this halacha exists in the heavenly spheres. Unless you understand it, how it is in its source in heaven, you have no right to even paskin on it the way it is down here. In other words, the Shalah, and the Rebbe would quote this Shalah, the Torah speaks bel yoinim v'reimezus betachtonim. When you have a halacha, the true wisdom behind that halacha is not the way it's expressed down here. It's the way it's in heaven. This is just the way it's rolled down. It's been ishtalshel, the way it has a physical manifestation. But the true wisdom is in heaven. When we say Torah loy b'shamayim means psak happens down here. Yeah, paskening happens down here for sure. Psak doesn't happen in heaven. And the story in Bab Metzia, when the voice came from heaven, Rabbi Eliezer's right, Rabbi Yeshua says, irrelevant. Psak happens down here, you follow majority, fine. But the truth of the wisdom is in heaven. This is just a far cry from the true reality of the way this wisdom in this case exists in heavenly spheres. And therefore the Vilna Gaon says, if you see it in heaven, then you truly understand what's going on down here. If you see its counterpart in heaven, then you understand what the real meaning behind this is. You can truly understand what the correct psak is down here. So the psak happens down here. But if you want to really understand down here, you ought to know what's happening up there. The Rebbe quoted this so many times. And therefore you can't help but wonder, Rebbe Vadia Yosef is marshalling, Loi Bashamayim, Torah is not in heaven, and therefore the fact that the Arizal sees heaven is irrelevant to halacha. The Vilna Gaon says exactly the opposite. It's very much relevant. In fact, you can't paskin down here unless you know what's going on up there. It's not a contradiction to Loi Bashamayim, like I explained. The psak happens down here, but to truly understand down here, you got to be in tune what goes on up there. Which means the true makubal is the true Pesach. According to the Vilna Gaon, the greater the Kabbalist, now he has to obviously be a huge Talmud Chacham in England, right? Granted, but the greater he is in Kabbalah, the greater the Pesach will be. So accordingly, now that's what the Vilna Gaon said. It has to be the Chidah felt the same way, and that's why the Chidah says that the Beis Yosef would have nullified his opinion. He would have lowered his head in respect and humility in front of the Arizal. In Psak, of course in Kabbalah, that no one denies. But in Psak, why? I think with the Vilna Gaon's explanation, it's a Dover HaPashut, that the more you know what's going on in heaven, then you have a greater understanding of what's going on down here, what this represents, and how the halacha should actually be. And it's just very surprising that Rebbe Vadia Yosef was choylek on the Chidah. The Chidah writes this, by the way, in a number of places. And Rebbe Vadia says he's choylek on the Chidah, on the Ben Ish Chai, the Stei Chemed, with an argument of Loi Bashamayim here. Now, Rebbe Vadia does bring some other sources. It's a very interesting letter that he has. But I think with the sentiment of the Vilna Gaon, this kasha falls off. And therefore, I mean, what Reb Moshe Feinstein says that you're allowed to argue with Arizal on Kabbalah, very surprising to allow that. But even just not to use the Arizal as the Kabbalah to be machriya. Also, if the Arizal reached the highest points of Kabbalah, so he's just like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. Whatever weight, if you allow the Zohar to tilt the scale, right, in a battle of the Poskim, the Arizal should be used as well. And also to say there's just another Posik, how could you say that? According to the Vilna Gaon, because of the Arizal's perception in heaven, he's miles above other Poskim, in Psak. So 3 issues with the letter of Reb Moshe. Number 1, how could you argue in the Arizal and Kabbalah? But also in Halacha, his authority should be sufficient to be machriya between Poskim, and like the Zohar, and Bechlal to look at him as just another Posik, because we don't have the right to know who's greater than who. I don't know, it boggles my mind. I don't know what to do, but that's the opinion of Reb Moshe and Reb Vadia Yosef. The Chidah was very clear. The Arizal in Psak was in a world of his own. He was in a league of his own. A league of his own. Wow. Okay. Look in number 13. This was a letter of the Rebbe that he wrote to somebody. There was a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. There are many yeshivas where they teach Kabbalah, right? So there's a yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael where they were teaching Zohar and Kisvei HaArizal in a new method. There, some modern Kabbalists had theories of how to explain the teachings of the Arizal. He didn't have any tradition. And the Rebbe writes how shocked he is. The Rebbe quotes that Reb Chaim Vital himself warned about how careful you have to be in understanding the words of the Arizal. We'll get back to that in just a moment. And the Rebbe says, look at number 13. V'oid yosen iflesi. The Rebbe says, you know what? You know why we're so confident as Chassidim? Because the Baal Shem Tov has a tradition from Achia Ashiloni, who was the source of Eliyahu Hanavi's knowledge. The tradition of the Baal Shem Tov and the Rabbeim is true, ultimate truth. The idea of Baal Shem Tov had the word of Hashem revealed to him. You know that Tzemach Tzedek writes about the Baal Shem Tov, the Maggid of Mizrich, God revealed himself to them. But the Rebbe says he learned from Achia Ashiloni. The Rebbe of Eliyahu and the Baal Shem Tov gave this gift to his students, and they gave it to their students, and their explanations have become mefursum. And you have Chassidus with all types of explanations which have strong foundations. Where does it come from that you have a new guy on the block wants to explain other explanations, his own ideas to explain the words of the Arizal and the Zohar in his own fashion? Bo b'shah that the words of the Rabbeim are me'irim and they're beautiful and they explain with their light we will go all the way to Mashiach. Like Mashiach himself told the Baal Shem Tov, when will I come? When your wells, when your well springs will be spread out. We know the Rebbe, the Sulam, the commentary of the Sulam of Rav Ashlag on the Zohar, the Rebbe had this issue, that where's his tradition of Kabbalah from? Where's his tradition from Kabbalah from? Somebody could be very bright and could have very good ideas, but you're playing with fire. Reb Chaim Vital cautioned about this. Now, I'm not questioning the Vilna Gaon's Kabbalah and his students, but there's something about the Baal Shem Tov. You know what it is? It's not from the Baal Shem Tov's own Chachma, the great Chacham that he was. The fact he was Mekabel from Achia Shiloni is crucial. It's crucial. It means this is Emes La'amitoy. And the Rebbe wasn't afraid to say, the Rebbe Fakir, he expresses his shock. He expresses his shock on what's going on with new people, Johnny come lately. Fine. Let's just quickly go to the last page. And we're going to finish up. So, the Arizal passes away. He wrote just a couple things himself. He had many students. The three most famous students of the Arizal would be Reb Chaim Vital, obviously. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, who was by the Arizal, and he traveled out of Israel. He visited the Maharshal in Poland. He went to Italy and taught the Rameh Fano. He met up with the Menachem Azariah of Fano, and he said, Menachem Azariah, you're still stuck with the Ramak. You got to wake up. You got to hear about the New Age, about the Arizal. And he taught the Rameh many of the ideas of the Arizal. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, he taught quite a few people teachings of the Arizal. Rabbi Avram Di Harera wrote the Shara Shamayim. He was one of probably the first one to say that the Tzimtzum of the Arizal is not literal. He was a student of Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. Rabbi Yisrael Saruk's teachings were also recorded in the Eimek HaMelech, one of the most controversial Sfarim in Kabbalah, Rabbi Naftali Bachrach from Germany. And his Sefer is very controversial because it's teachings of the Arizal, but not through Reb Chaim Vital. I'll get back to that in a moment, why that's controversial. But he also believes Tzimtzum was not literal, and he also received either directly or indirectly from Yisrael Saruk. So you have two students of Yisrael Saruk saying that Tzimtzum of the Arizal is not literal. Rabbi Avram Di Harera in the Shara Shamayim and Reb Bachrach in the Eimek HaMelech. What? Sefer. And you can't help but think that it must be Rabbi Yisrael Saruk. If two of his Talmidim are writing this, it's probably him who pushed the idea that the Tzimtzum of the Arizal was not literal. Now, I'm just guessing that. But it's a little, what? No, he doesn't. Never tells us if it's literal or not. For sure. In fact, so the Alter Rebbe, because the Shomer Emunim believe that, but even before him, you have this, the Eimek HaMelech was 100 years before almost, the Shomer Emunim, and also the Sha'ar HaShamayim was the early days, a student of Yisrael Saruk, and Reb Menachem Azariah Fano. But Menachem Zarefanu received many teachings of the Arizal through Yisrael Saruk. So he's very instrumental. There was another student of the Arizal, Rabbi Yosef Ibn Tibul. He was just a big Kabbalist. And of course, there's Reb Chaim Vital. Now, Reb Chaim Vital writes that I and only I was given permission from the Arizal to record the Arizal's teachings. I and only I. Right? And he's the one that's writing it. Okay? Now, it was known by the Arizal students, Reb Chaim Vital, he was considered the greatest amongst the students. Other people did write down their things, for themselves at least. Reb Chaim Vital was the one officially selected, as he testifies, to record it for posterity. But Reb Chaim Vital refused, he didn't want to reveal it to anybody. Definitely not outside Israel, but even within Israel. Reb Chaim Vital said, it's too radiant, too bright, it's not for the public. It's not for the public. Even though the Arizal said that these days it's a mitzvah to reveal Kabbalah. Mitzvah legalo zois hachochma, the Rabbeim always quoted. And the Arizal tells Reb Chaim Vital, only you can transcribe it. So how could Reb Chaim Vital then decide, I don't want to reveal this? Like the equation doesn't add up. So I've always been bothered by it. So I think the simple answer is, Reb Chaim Vital said for sure, the Arizal says it's a mitzvah to reveal Kabbalah. In other words, Bechlal, people should start getting doses of Kabbalah. But not this. A Bissel Zayir, some basic Kabbalah. But it's a little inappropriate that all of a sudden you want to break the dam and allow Kabbalah to reach the masses, and you want to reveal the most intense areas of Kabbalah. No. For sure reveal Kabbalah to the masses, but not these teachings of this is right? How could it be that at the same time you want to reveal Kabbalah to the masses, you're going to jump, you'll throw them into the deep end of the Atlantic Ocean, in the Mariana, what's it called, the trench, the deepest level? So that's just my 2 cents of how it wouldn't be a contradiction to the Arizal's desire for the Kabbalah to be disseminated. So Reb Chaim Vital did borrow some of the writings of his friends. Oh, you heard that from our Rebbe? Reb Chaim, if he felt it was accurate, he would put in his own writings. So in the writings that we have from Reb Chaim Vital, you also have mixed in there from some of his friends. In addition, one night some of his friends broke into his, they'd made a Chassidic Gneva. They went into his room and they transcribed some of his writings so they could have copies of it. But much of Reb Chaim Vital's writings he took with him to the grave. There's a lot of study done about all the writings we have of the Arizal today, the Kisvei Ari from Reb Chaim Vital, the history of the different Sfarim, what was buried underground, what was in the hands of Reb Chaim Vital's son Shmuel, what was in the hands of other people. There's some confusion, definitely by me, and people have tried to make a seder. We have to have a whole shir on it actually, Pashut, the manuscripts of Reb Chaim Vital. But here's the shaila. Reb Chaim Vital says that I and only I was given permission to transcribe the Arizal's teachings. So what's Yisrael Saruk going around teaching everybody? The Rameh Mifanu, his whole shaykhis, he never met, he had no correspondence directly with the Arizal. He was a chassid of the Ramak. The Rameh Mifanu talks about it in his introduction to his Sefer Pelach Hariman, about this, although he appreciates the Arizal, he never forgot the Ramak, etc. But who revealed to him the Arizal's teachings? All Bishol Saruk. How did that happen? How did that happen? I thought Reb Chaim Vital was the only one who was granted permission to record and transcribe. Oh. So number 17, very quickly, okay, we're going to finish up very quickly. This is from a letter of Rav Hutner, when the Sefer Alfasi Zuta was printed, which is a work from Menachem Azariah Fano, a kitzur of the work of the Rif. Rav Hutner wrote a letter to be printed in the introduction of the Alfasi Zuta. And in it, he quotes this question. He says, there are so many secret worlds from the secrets of the world called Olam HaMalbush and Tehiri Allah. They're mentioned in Nefesh HaChaim from Chaim Volozhiner. But the source of this is only from Yisrael Saruk. And I don't understand, how could the Vilna Gaon not have cared about the fact that the Arizal said only Reb Chaim Vital can record? She said, the truth of the matter is, you have to know what Reb Tzadok HaKohen writes. The Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin in Sefer Zichronos says very simple. All the Kabbalah of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug from the Arizal happened before Reb Chaim Vital came. Reb Chaim Vital was in Tzfas, he learned by the Ramak. After the passing of the Ramak, he went to Damascus. The Arizal spent time in Tzfas waiting for Reb Chaim Vital to come. He even haunted him in his dreams. Come to Tzfas. It took him time to come. During those couple months, the Arizal got busy. You should know when Reb Chaim Vital came in the end, he got a bit of a cold shoulder from the Arizal. Certain things he wanted explanations. The Arizal said, "Oh, no, where were you? I was explaining that 2 months ago. You should have been here. You should have been here." What did the Arizal do during that time? He taught Talmidim. Says Reb Tzaddik HaKohen, Rabbi Yisrael Saruk was there before Reb Chaim Vital came. And then Rabbi Yisrael Saruk went to Italy. He was taught things Reb Chaim Vital wasn't taught. When the Arizal said only Reb Chaim should record, it means him from amongst his friends. But during the period of time that Reb Chaim wasn't there, someone else has to record. And there were things maybe the Arizal didn't even repeat. Could be, yeah. You see, consistency.
Memory's not great.
And therefore he says Reb Chaim Vital didn't quote these things because it could be they weren't discussed while he was there. And the warning of the Arizal not to look at the writings of the other students was only said once Reb Chaim Vital came. It's not talking about Yisrael Saruk. And the Rameh Mifano in his Kabbalistics, in his form of Kabbalah, was very much affected by the teachings of the Arizal, all given to him by Yisrael Saruk. So there are things there you won't find in Reb Chaim Vital's writings. So it's a whole new glimpse into the world of the Arizal, and it's a legitimate glimpse. So this links the Baal Yahrzeit of today, the Baal Yahrzeit of tonight. Very quickly though, in number 15, there's from the Rashash, the great Kabbalist of Sholem Sherebi. The Rashash, who said about himself he had the spark, he was a Gilgul of the Arizal. The Rashash said he was a Gilgul of the Arizal. I saw it once in the Sefer Taimei HaMinhagim. Have fun going to find something in that Sefer. You spend your whole life trying to find something there. But it's there, I saw it. At least I believe I did. And the Rashash says, when I learn Kabbalah, it's only the Arizal, Reb Chaim Vital. Now, Reb Chaim Vital has a few of his own Sfarim that are not officially Arizal's writings, his own personal stuff. But anything else I don't touch. Not from the earlier Kabbalists, not from the later ones. And even the other students of the Arizal I don't learn. And he says, when I learned Reb Chaim Vital's Sfarim now, and in it he quotes from his friends, I skip the paragraph. Look what he says. When I see something, I skip over it. He says, don't touch anything besides for the true things that we have from Reb Chaim Vital himself. That's it. Now, the Rebbe addressed this in number 16. It's another letter of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says that you're right that there are some Mekubalim that when they reach certain paragraphs from the other students in the pre-Eitz Chaim, and I mentioned Chaim Vital will quote sometimes from his friends, Medalgim, they skip over it. Now the Rebbe doesn't say who, but I assume it's the Rashash, as you see in number 15. The Rebbe says this is not the tradition of the Rabbeim. The Rabbeim were Kabbalists and they had their own tradition. Very often the Rabbeim quote from the other students of the Arizal. And we quote from the Ramak, and we quote from Yisrael Sarug, not like the Sephardic Kabbalists. Why? Why are we more confident than the Rashash? So the Rebbe says the answer is Achi Asheloni. It's what it all boils down to. The Rebbe, beautiful answer. These Achronim didn't want to take a risk. They knew if it's from Reb Chaim Vital's pen, you can take it to the bank. Anybody else? It's a risk. There's questions. Masha'en came the Baal Shem Tov and the Magid and the Alter Rebbe and their successors. They had a tradition, Ish Mipiyish, and the Baal Shem Tov got from Achi Asheloni, who Eliyahu received from him. So the Rabbeim knew what's true. They were able to sniff out in any Kabbalistic work what is in fact accurate. And that's why there was Soymech on Eimek HaMelech, which I told you was very controversial, because the Eimek HaMelech is from Reb Bachrach in Germany, from Rabbi Yisrael Saruk, is Bechlal different than Reb Chaim Vital, and the Rabbeim quote from it. There's many Sephardim. The Rashash wouldn't let you look in Emek HaMelech. Even within Chaim Vital Sforim, he's jumping over the paragraphs that quoting from others. Imagine we saw Emek HaMelech, he wouldn't look at it. That's not the tradition of the Rabbeim. Why? It goes back. Since we have a tradition of Achia Shaloni, we were given, the Rabbeim were given the glasses of truth. And that's why they're not scared. They know exactly where to pick up the truth from any sefer of Kabbalah. And that was also what the Alter Rebbe's take about the Ramak. We saw in number 5. That the Alter Rebbe, different than other Kabbalists, he said the Arizal, but everyone has a space, and the Arizal was actually being Mosif on the Ramak. Anyhow, so this is just fascinating. Let me just end off with one tidbit. We mentioned the Arizal of Yosef Kaira. They had some halachic disputes, although they maybe were not aware of each other's opinion. They became mechutanim. The Arizal's daughter married Rabbi Yosef Kaira's son. Rabbi Yosef Kaira was almost 50 years older, but Rabbi Yosef Kaira was married 3 times. So his son, I think from his 3rd marriage, married the daughter of the Arizal. There is a story, I don't know the source of this, but it was once the Arizal was davening in the same shul as Rabbi Yosef Kaira, and the Chazan had finished Shmoneh Esrei, but he was waiting for Rabbi Yosef Kaira to finish. So Arizal said, start. So people are like, whoa, what's going on over here? It's family politics or something. So afterwards, the Arizal said that we stop for someone or we wait for a Rav while he's davening, not while he's learning. B'Yosef Kaira Taka said during Shmoneh Esrei, maybe during one of the brachas, all of a sudden a halachic issue came to his mind in Hilchos Shabbos, and he pondered on it for a bit. So that's why Arizal told the Chazan, if the Rav's davening, we'll wait. If he's learning, we're not going to wait. Anyhow, Zechusi of the Arizal Yogin Aleinu.